Hi, my name is Sandy Campbell, and this is my story. So, this is a picture of my mom, and I get choked up talking about Mom. It's only been 2 years since she's been gone, but without question, she was the most important person in my life growing up. She was my greatest cheerleader. She made me believe I could do absolutely anything at any time, that I was fabulous and there was nothing I couldn't do. She was my greatest supporter. I could talk to her about anything, tell her anything. She was fabulous. She had a personality larger than life, and she had a figure after having 7 kids. She looked like she had never had children. She proudly wore her bikini most of her life. And when she dressed, she would turn heads when she walked into a room with my dad. My mom had full lips, and she proudly wore red lipstick, and her whole life it was bright red or fuchsia. Those were her colors, and she could pull it off. And when I did the speech at Mom's celebration of life, I said, you guys may think Taylor Swift started this red lip things. No, it started with Mom. Yeah, pretty special. And it was my honor and privilege to be able to speak at her celebration of life. And one of my brothers said that I had brought back to him who she really was, because that had almost been lost with all the challenges of the dementia years. So she passed away 2.5 years ago. So this is my dad. My dad, Harley Deeks. Dad is 92. Still living on his own, driving, going strong, and amazing everybody else for who he is. And he, along with Mom, was also always the rock in our family. My dad is first and foremost a gentleman, and people who meet him recognize that right away. He always said that people mattered. People mattered. And he finished his career in top management in Molson Breweries. But he always told the people that worked for him that, remember, you're not just working for a wage here, you're working for your family. And Dad lived that out. He was totally devoted to my mom, always, committed to us as a family. He modeled everything that a father should ever model in life. Integrity and being there, the value of family, the value of giving to community, all those things. We used to have family trips when we were younger, and sing in the car, and Sundays we'd go for family drives, and we'd go to the Dairy Queen, and it must have cost him a fortune with 7 kids just to buy us all an ice cream, but he did. And even now, he's just quietly there, supporting all of us in any way he can. And we've just done this book of Dad, and it's his life story from beginning to end. It's been wonderful to learn more about things that happened in his life and what made him who he is, and to see how that has impacted all of us, our kids, our grandkids. It's just amazing to me how even some of the grandkids are just like modeling themselves after him. So that the author of a family legacy, the Harley Deeks family. They had his retirement party at the Westin Hotel in Edmonton. And what they did was they ran 120 dozen Molson Canadian Harley Deeks beer. They had to license it as a Molson product so they could serve it at his retirement party. And so for 24 hours, there was Harley Deeks Molson Canadian. And so this is my grandma. And from the time I was little, I was always Grandma's girl. They said I had her eyes, and she had a wonderful sense of humor. But we would go every summer to my grandparents' cottage in the Ottawa Valley and just be showered with love from the moment we got there to when we left. And I just had this special bond with her that was, I don't know how to describe it. It just still influences me today. And I haven't seen much of her since I was 10 years old. But when I look at where I came from and all the rest of it, my grandma has just always been really important. So this picture of grandma holding me as a newborn, and I think I was one of her first granddaughters, which probably is why it made me special to grandma. And then grandma when I was 10, and that was just before we left and moved from Ontario to BC, so that ongoing times with her changed. But she lived to 99 years old and drove until she was in her 90s and lived on her own till she was in her mid-90s. And one of my brothers went to see her when she was in her final years, and she was still had all the memories and all the stories and everything else. And yeah, my grandma. This is a grandma picture. The middle one is of me with my first grandson, so it's kind of special to me. I kind of put it together with the grandma picture in mind. My grandma was Eva Bell Beckstead Deeks, and this was her wedding dress. And I just look at it, it's kind of a little the worse for wear, but it's just kind of special. And I'm just so grateful that my cousin wanted to give it to me to have, because it belonged with me instead of in the bottom of an old trunk. So that's my grandma's dress. And my cousin's wife also gave us grandma's jewelry. We came home from our visit there last year, and I quite often wear a ring that belonged to my grandmother. My grandma belonged to Eastern Star, and my grandfather was in the Masonic Lodge, and grandma believed in community service and giving back to the community, again through his parents. My dad got that from both of them. And this is my grandma's Eastern Star ring. This is a twiddle muff. I hadn't heard of one until a few years ago. A twiddle muff is something that you can put your hands in either side, and it's made for people who have dementia and Alzheimer's, and it's used as a calming device. After her stroke, I took it in and we tucked it under Mom's arm, and so it became part of Mom's final journey as well. So that's a twiddle muff. When I was younger, I used to read all the time, and this was my favorite book. It has short stories about all kinds of things in there, just little 3 or 4 page stories. There were puzzles, there were all kinds of things in it. Like with my other book, I probably read it 1,000 times. And it was one of the things that over the passage of time disappeared. Didn't know where it was. And I was helping a friend clean her house out and get rid of things. And she had one. And she didn't want it. So again, after all these years, I got my book back. This is a picture that I had done years ago, and it's taken from pictures at my grandparents' cottage in the Ottawa Valley. My father grew up in Pembroke, and just outside of Pembroke is a small lake called Round Lake, and that's where they built a cottage in 1940, and we spent every summer until I was 10 years old. We spent our holidays there, and we were just unconditionally loved. It was just a time of childhood that was pure and joyful, and both my sister and I count that as our favorite memories of growing up, was being at Grandma and Grandpa's cottage. These were pictures that they had there of Grandma and Grandpa, and Grandma as a young girl with her mother, father, and her sister, and my grandfather with his family when he was young. So I brought it home and had it all put in a frame because I couldn't go anymore after I was 10. I brought some of the memories with me and kept them as part of my life. This was a special gift to me from my sister. And my sister Paula is just 13 months younger than I am. She said, well, we figured it out when we were younger. A year, a month, 2 weeks, and a day, 5 hours and 5 minutes. That's how much younger Paula is than I am. I am so blessed. And she's a fabulous sister. I really admire and respect her. My dad always took pictures. Every event that we ever had as a family was photographed and photographed. We all got a little frustrated because we were tired of it, but my life is full of moments and memories like this, where we were all together. My older brother, who had moved to New Zealand, came home every couple of years, and we would have times like this where we just all got together and hung out, and it was just like being a family like we always had been. And he was home last year as well, and we've continued to do this our whole lives. We also noticed that we almost always line up oldest to youngest, and this was a candid shot taken after the formal one, where this is kind of all the siblings, and we get kind of goofy together still. It's lovely to be all senior citizens now, and when we get together, we're still kids. We just have fun, and we poke each other in the nose and do silly things like that. And this was not planned. This is just something that happened after one of the family photo shoots, which is kind of neat. And we moved my parents. We moved my parents from their big home with a swimming pool into a seniors building. Big condo, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms. But just 6 weeks before, we had another one of the family reunions. And you know, when the whole family gets together, there's over 60 of us. Yeah, this was taken at my parents' pool with everybody. And I have this sitting in my living room because this is my family. I got on a plane, flew to Calgary, started a whole new life with my family in Calgary, not knowing anybody. I worked at Eaton's, downtown Calgary, and within a year of being there, I became manager of the Eaton's pet department. Brought home every animal known to mankind. We had 8 or 10 tanks of tropical fish. I had a pet iguana that I could make him lie down on my arm, wrap his tail around, and I could get him on his back, just lying there. We had guinea pigs, which we loved, and I still have this big attraction today for guinea pigs. I had one that was a pet, and she had freedom of the apartment, and when I came home, I'd walk in the door and I'd go, "Phyllis," and she'd come squeaking out and run and greet me at the door. And she would even beg for food if I held food up for her. Loved that. Anyway, we had birds, fish, rabbits, guinea pigs. Those were my last years in my parents' home. Dad was transferred again to Regina just before I got married. So once again, I was alone without any of my family around, starting a marriage in Calgary. My husband was from Kelowna, and when we visited here, I loved Kelowna and still do. So when I was pregnant with our first one, we decided that we would leave Calgary and come to Kelowna. So in 1972, I moved to Kelowna, and this has been my home ever since. It is the best place to live. There's nothing about it I would change. It's been really good, and though my family has moved several times since, I have no plans at this time to leave and go and join any family members anywhere at any time in my life. I have had both my kids here. My son Mike was born in 72 and Jim was born in 74. I absolutely loved being a mom. It was one of the total joys of my life. I was involved in my kids' preschool, parent participation preschool they had in those days. When they got into school, they went to A.S. Matheson, and I became the music mom and played the piano for the kindergarten and the grade 1 and 2 teachers, and very involved in their Christmas concerts and all that sort of thing. I would take the boys to the beach every chance I had and taught them how to swim there. They got swimming goggles from my parents, and they spent all their time on the bottom of the lake looking at everything, which was really cool. And as they got older, I would pile all their friends in our car and we'd go and spend a day at the beach. Those are some of my best memories and best times. When the boys were younger, we took them to bowling. And I highly recommend bowling for parents who want to develop character in their kids, because they cannot blame anybody else when they throw a gutter ball. They dissolve in tears and fight through it, but their score is their score, so they're part of a team, but it's also individual. Anyway, both my boys bowled, and Doug and I used to go and be scorekeepers. We were there every Saturday, and one year both of the kids made the provincial team. We didn't even know it existed. Mike made the provincial team, and Jim was the BC under 12 bowling champ. We didn't know anything about it, but through the youth bowling, they were both flown free of charge to Winnipeg with the BC team, and they competed in the nationals in bowling. And I decided to go, and I had not flown on an airplane for a very long time, and I was terrified. And we didn't have a lot of money, so I took the cheapest flight I could get to Winnipeg. And it was the milk run. And I think by the time I got to Winnipeg and back, I was up and down about 8 or 9 times and flew out of every airport between here and there. And I was a seasoned flyer by the time I got back. Anyway, neither of them came away with a gold medal, but it was a really wonderful experience to go down and to see them compete on that level. Probably what we enjoyed the most as a family was when we went to the Shuswap. We had a small boat, and one of the guys I worked with at Sears, he had a cottage that you could only get to by boat. So we would pack everything in the boat for a week and go in and spend a week on the Shuswap. And all we did was fish and read and swim and sit on the beach and look at the stars and have a campfire every night. It was, I think my kids would probably say it was one of their better memories of growing up. We did that for quite a few years, and I always came back really tanned, never as dark as my mom, but really tanned, and really loving those times. They were really cool. So both my kids have grown up, and Mike lives here in Kelowna still, and he and his gal Nancy, they have horses. They're not Clydesdales, they are Shires, which are like a Clydesdale. And my son, who never knew anything about horses, now has a horse called Leo. He was one of the biggest horses you would ever imagine. And they love their time with their horses. My son Jim moved away. He moved to Edmonton. First he lived with my parents and took a course at NAIT. And he now is a national manager for human resources, customer service for a large company. And he's married and has a couple of kids. And so, this is a picture taken a few years ago now of my son Jim and his wife Robin. And they were married at the Overlander Lodge, just outside of the Jasper Park, on the May 24th weekend. And wouldn't you know it, it snowed. And the pictures of her sitting on the railing with this beautiful umbrella behind her and snow all around her, they weren't what was planned, but they were absolutely beautiful. So one year, when they'd been married a few years, I got a box in the mail from them. They don't usually send me things, and I was like, I wonder what this is. And this is what they gave me. And this was their way of telling me that they were expecting. Isn't that cute? That's the grandma and the grandbaby. So this sits in my china cabinet all the time. It's really special to me. And that was their way of letting me know that they were expecting, which I thought was creative and really cute. So they have 2 kids. This picture's a year old, but this is my grandson Jack. And Jack has just become a teenager, and he does improv. and he is fantastic at it. I was so fortunate last year to be able to be there when he did one of his improv stage things, and he was absolutely amazing. Got a great sense of humor and a really kind, loving person, and his thing right now is scarves. Every picture you see of him, he has a scarf. He likes them, and he's just a real sweetie. I just love him. And this is my granddaughter, May, his sister. And May's a couple of years younger than Jack, and May plays ringette. Her mom still plays, and Robin coaches as well. And they just won a silver medal in a tournament not long ago. So May plays soccer and plays ringette, and she's very tall. They're both very tall for their age, and both very loving and very caring kids. One of the challenges in my life has been that they live in Edmonton and I live here, which means I haven't been able to spend the time with them that I would have liked to. And so they come out here every couple of years, and when I go there, I'm dividing my time between parents and siblings and grandkids, but I get to see them when I go, and that's always good. So when I had my kids, and when Doug and I were married, I was not a person of faith. I kind of had a belief that was left over from Sunday school when I was younger. No understanding really about who God was. I just kind of thought of God as a kindly grandfather, and everybody gets to heaven and just be nice and do a few good things. That's kind of where I was. And when I had my kids, I came to a place where I really wanted to be sure that I was teaching them what was true. And it began a search in my life that took me where I didn't expect to be. I thought maybe, I could take them to church and let them learn a few things, and then I thought, yeah, but maybe when they're 10, I'll say, well, I didn't really believe all that, didn't want to do that, didn't want to fake it, so I wanted to be really sure that I was teaching them truth. And so for me, it began a search for truth. I desperately hoped it wasn't going to lead me to the Bible and God and Jesus, because like I say, I had a lot of attitude and a lot of it wasn't good. And I really did not want anybody telling me what to do in my life. That's kind of the bottom line. So I was reading about reincarnation and astral travel and looking everywhere. And it was interesting when the people that came into my life at that time, people showed up in my life who already had a faith, and I entered into conversations with them that were mostly put down and defiant on my part, and patient and knowledgeable on their part. And probably the one who spoke the most to me was Martha. We would have conversations, and I would tell her about the stuff I was reading, and her response was always, well, the Bible says, the Bible says. And I remember with great attitude I said to her, well, it may say something different to me than what it says to you. Maybe I should read it for myself. Martha being Martha, I had a new living testament in my hands very quickly. She told me to start reading at the book of John. And I would read, and I'd call her up and I'd say, I just read this, I think it's a bunch of crap. And Martha would say, she'd say, this is the historical context and this is the culture he was speaking into. And every question I had, she explained, she enlarged it, gave it context. And what happened for me when I was reading the Bible was that I knew I had unfinished business with God. I know now it was God's Holy Spirit moving through His Word and through those times, but I didn't really know what it was. But I became very unsettled and very much knowing that something was unsettled that I needed to deal with. So I wrestled through this in my usual attitude, but with great aggressive wanting to know. And when I was 28 years old, I was watching Billy Graham on TV. I was home alone most evenings, and I was watching Billy Graham on TV all by myself. And when he gave an invitation for people to come down on the field to accept Jesus, I knelt on the floor in front of the TV and I said and agreed that I was a sinner. Didn't feel like a sinner because I compared myself to other people. Hadn't murdered anybody, hadn't stolen, but yet I believed because the Bible had said it and I had read it, and I knew that I wasn't perfect. It was like I had to compare myself to God's standard and not to the other standards I've been using. And so I accepted that I was a sinner, and I prayed along with Billy Graham. And you know, I thought I was going to have skyrockets and emotional feelings and all these things, and that didn't happen for me. So I kind of wondered if it took. And so about 4 weeks later, I did it again. Another Billy Graham crusade, knelt on the floor, did the same thing again. Through all of the years of walking with the Lord, I have been led and taken places and done things that I never ever thought I would. One thing I knew I could never do was speak in front of people. And at a small ladies group at the local church I was attending, I knew they were going to ask me to speak. And when they did, I said yes, but only because I knew that it was something I was supposed to do. And I said, you had better pray nonstop until I do this, because I have absolutely no idea how I will ever manage to do this. I'm saying it because I believe it's something God wants me to do. And so for 2 weeks I quivered and quaked and fasted and prayed. Didn't know much about fasting, but I thought I'd try that too. And by the time the day came for me to speak, I knew that God had given me something to say that really mattered. And so what became more important, and I remember saying to myself, it doesn't matter if I trip on the stairs on the way up. It doesn't matter if I get emotional. It doesn't matter if I have to stop and take a deep breath or choke on my words. What really matters is that what He has given me to say is shared with those people. And so I sat between two of my friends, Martha and Ev, waiting for the moment, thinking I could run out of the room at any time. I didn't. And when I walked up there and started to speak, it was like I had done it 1,000 times before. I was able to speak clearly and look around the room and look at people, and it just felt like I had done it 1,000 times before. And before I left the platform, I knew it was something I would do again. It's interesting. I have had many occasions to speak many places since then. I've spoken at Christian Women's. I've spoken at the ladies' special things at the church in past years. I've done eulogies at people's funerals, and I've just felt incredibly blessed that I've been able to get up and really bring somebody, you know, to the people who are there in a way that they can relate to them. And the Alzheimer's Society, I guess it's almost 4 years ago now, I was asked to speak at the Alzheimer's Society and be their honoree for that year. And I was asked to represent caregivers. And I said to all the people in my caregiving group, the support group, that I would tell all of our stories. And so I gave the caregiver journey, and I spoke first at a small meeting at the Alzheimer's Society, and they actually asked me to come back and record it, and they put it on Facebook and have shared it with other people. I was asked again to give a caregiver perspective on the Alzheimer journey to these med students, and it was really wonderful to have the opportunity to say stuff to them that maybe they needed to hear, and to give them more insight into the fact that, you know, what's going on in our home is not what they see when we walk into an office. And women past a certain age, when we go to the doctor, we need to be believed, not patronized, like so many women have. And I think at the very end of the thing, they had asked, you know, what do you want to tell us, or what can we do? And I said two things. Number one, believe us. Believe us when we tell you something. We tell you something's going on with our husband. believe us. When we tell you something's going on with us, listen to us and believe us. But the second part of it was that all the years that I took my husband to the doctor, it was always about my husband and his disease, and our whole life revolved around that. And I think the very thing I finished with was, you know, in all those years when we went to the doctor, it was never about me. And maybe it should have been. And because caregivers get lost in the shuffle. Caregivers often die before their spouses and carry a load and a burden that most people will never, ever know. So that breakthrough that I had in speaking in front of people has been used in a lot of really important ways. Mom passed away 2 years ago. I was the MC at her celebration of life, and I had 7 long pages talking about my mom from when I was little. My youngest brothers wouldn't have had the same journey as I did. But again, it was bringing my mom back. She had been lost to dementia for many years before she passed away, and one of my sisters-in-law said, "I never really knew your mom," because she had come into the picture after Mom had dementia. And one of my brothers said that he had almost forgotten who she was as we were frustrated in the dementia journey with her. So I had a chance again to use that gift that God gave me to bring Mom back and to make her real to those who didn't know her, and bring back who she was to the rest of the family as well. So that was a big thing. This is my Bible. It's not the first one I had, but this is the one that Les gave me, the last one that he gave me. And when I first started reading the Bible, I had always been raised that you do not write in books. And I read a book many years ago that talked about how the Bible is the manufacturer's handbook. And I love that expression. It's the manufacturer's handbook. So it now is something that I write in all the time. And I highlight all kinds of things in there all the time. And quite interestingly, one of the things that God really needed to deal with me early in my life was, as a Christian, was how I used my voice and my mouth and my words. I had been the best dirty joke teller that you would ever meet in your life. And I would tell any color to anybody, anytime, anywhere, if they would listen. And after, this was probably just before I was baptized, after not dealing with it for many years, I had a chance that it was a sense that it was on the top of the pile. It was like, Sandy, you want to grow, you want to know me more, you want to go deeper. It's time to deal with this. And so I remember telling God, I am willing to be willing, and that's the best I can give you. I don't want to give them up. I like them, they make people laugh, and I do not want to give them up. And so I said, willing to be willing, that's it. So what happened was, after that, I would go to tell a joke, and instead of seeing the person that was really enjoying it, I'd see the person behind them who was either grossed out or uncomfortable. Never happened before. Went to tell a joke one day and forgot the punchline. Never happened before. Told a joke one day and somebody went, ooh. Never happened before. And slowly, this willing to be willing started to change to, yeah, okay, let's do this. And I think one of the things that really triggered me as I went along in that journey was a verse that God gave me in the Bible. It was one of the first verses. I always say there must be a soft spot somewhere on my forehead from the times he goes, this one's for you. And it was Ephesians 4:29. Let no unwholesome talk come out of your mouth, but only that which is helpful for building others up, that it may benefit those who listen. And I knew that that verse was for me, and I needed to deal with it. Years ago, when my kids were little, My son Jim gave me this one year, and it means a lot to me. It sits in my china cabinet. Peace on the outside comes from knowing God within. It has a butterfly on it. A couple of years after I came to know the Lord, I wrote a little poem about a butterfly, and it talks about the change in life from caterpillar perspective to butterfly perspective. And because of that, I've always liked butterfly things. So people who know me have given me butterfly things. And this is another one my son gave me one year for Christmas. It's a really special little ornament. So while people collect angels, and I have a few, I seem to have a butterfly collection, and they're everywhere. They're on the top of my Christmas tree. They're everywhere in my house. So part of the joy again of being given the gift of words and using them on occasions, we have written family poems for special occasions. And they're usually in my handwriting, and I usually am the one that gets to read them. This was for my parents' 60th anniversary. And it kind of tells the story of our family, a little bit about each of us, a lot of inside family stuff that other people wouldn't know. But I'm going to read it anyway. This happened, it was their 65th anniversary. This happened 65 years ago. In college, I want you to know. They met on a blind date, decided to mate. From that day their love, it did grow. Barb Herring, a name he'd agree, he liked with real certainty. Harley Deeks, not my choice, she was heard to voice for the name of a husband to be. A tall football player he'd play, a tiny cheerleader she'd yay. Though their heights did not match, they both made a catch, and marriage was soon on the way. They were a bride and a groom who never came out of their room. What they did, we can guess, 'cause we do know the rest. They started their own baby boom. As the new generation began, their household with kids overran. 4 kids in 4 years, lots of joy and some tears, the start of the Harley Deeks clan. Now Don was the first one to come, an active boy, happy and fun. Now Barb shook her head and tied him in bed when at 9 months he started to run. Our Sandy was next one in line. She seldom had reason to whine. She'd sneak out at night and get in before light. We all thought that she was quite fine. Then Paula, an athlete to be, with talent beyond you and me, played grass hockey and ball, but has stayed away from golf so she can continue to see. Now Gord, when a wee boy did smile, with his teeth missing all of the while, and when he got older, his pranks grew much bolder. He developed a memorable style. The squarest and happiest of all was our Greg, born in summer, not fall. He cycled and swam, a triathlete fan, and says, yes, I know, but on call. Now Jim, a remarkable guy, is as thrifty as Mum when he buys. When his brothers grew old, their golf balls he sold. He had many lows and some highs. And at last, but not least, Peter came. Hockey was really his game. In a fight, got in trouble. Harley came on the double. Now in Molson's, he's making his name. With our spouses and children we state that this family is really first rate. With your love and devotion and shared emotion, we're glad you both had your blind date. And today as we celebrate here, we've all come from far and from near to show how we feel and to make a big deal. To you, we applaud and we cheer. Hip, hip, hooray. Chokes me up. We've had the most beautiful family memories and lots of get-togethers like this one. And pretty fortunate to be from the family I love. To me, one of my favorite places to be is the beach. And I go there with a book to read uninterrupted. I go there to sit and reflect, to hear from God. There's so many beautiful things in nature that have spoken to me at times at the beach. It's been a place where I call friends and say, hey, I'm going to go there. Let's all grab a meal and we'll meet together. But I love to swim. And from the time I was little, I loved the water and loved to swim. We learned to swim at my grandparents' cottage in the Ottawa Valley. And whenever there's water and a chance to get in it, I'm there. I'm the last one out when it cools down at the end of the summer, and I'm usually in before most people I know. So swimming is really, really something I love. But just being there, it's a time for me where I can just be. Nothing else is calling to me. And so it's really, really special. I took my kids to the beach all the time. I think I mentioned that before. Took my kids to the beach all the time and taught them to swim and swam with them and watched them put their goggles on. At Sarson's Beach, they even swam out and found freshwater clams down in the bottom, filled their rubber dinghy with the freshwater clams, brought them all back to shore, and then used them like rocks to skip them back out into the water. But we were at the beach 2 or 3 times a week, so it was good. When my kids were little, my mother-in-law had a wonderful influence on me, and she was an avid gardener, and I knew nothing about gardening, and I wasn't really all that interested in it, but I did want to keep an eye on my kids, so I started digging up grass and creating gardens so I could be outside where my kids were and know what was going on. And since then, my father was always an avid gardener, and since then gardening has been something that's become important to me. Gardening became my therapy, and when we moved here there was not one flower, not one garden, nothing here, and it now is a place with perennial shrubs and bushes and ground covers and patios and all kinds of things like that. And I always say, well, this was my therapy, and you can see from the size of my garden the amount of therapy I've needed. So one of my joys in the summer is having friends come over and just sit outside, and we watch the yellow evening primroses open, and it feels like a miracle every time I see it. But it's quiet out there, there's not a lot of light, and we watch the stars come out, and I put the fire pot on, and just being out there with one person or with a group and just quietly enjoying the space, that really means a lot to me. And family members who've come into town and visited during the summer, my brother Pete comes out every year, and we have at least one night where we sit out there in the back, have a glass of wine, usually till about 2 in the morning, just talking and being and enjoying it. There's even an owl that lives in this park, and sometimes I hear him up on the branch, and saw him one night, which was really kind of cool. And I've always been a reader. From the time I was little, I've been a reader. I was reading a book when I went in the hospital to have Jim, my second son, and I didn't finish it before I came home, and found that I was reading it behind his head when I was nursing him, and reading it on the bed when I was changing his diaper, and it was like I needed to make a choice. Reading took over everything. Everything around me disappeared when I read, and so I gave up reading fiction for most of the time. And when I came to know Jesus, I started to read books, Christian books. And I love the journey of discovery into learning about the Jewish culture and understanding so much of what I read in Scripture. I love reading people's stories about challenges in life and how they've dealt with them and what has meant something to them. I think we can gain something from everybody we meet if we're open, and books are like that for me. When I was in my early 40s, I had a medical stress leave. And it's interesting, but I look upon it as one of the greatest gifts God gave me in my life. I was going full tilt in everything I did. I didn't have any boundaries. I didn't know that I could say no to anything, anywhere, to anybody. And I was overdoing it everywhere I went. Overdeveloped sense of responsibility, maybe from being the oldest daughter, second oldest of 7 kids, personality, whatever. Anyway, I knew that if I didn't stop, I was going to end up in trouble. So I went to the doctor and told him I was not quite ready for medication, but would he give me this medical leave? And so I was off for 3.5 months. And it caused me to stop in my tracks and reevaluate everything about who I am, everything about how I see God and how I'm living my life. I didn't know that boundaries were important. I didn't have any. I thought as a Christian I had to say yes to everything. And it was a relief maybe to discover that it's okay to say, no, I'm not doing that, or I can't help you. Didn't know that before then. I learned that just because I can do something well, or maybe better than somebody else, that doesn't mean that I'm supposed to do it. Doesn't mean that I'm supposed to take the leadership. Maybe I'm supposed to come alongside and encourage somebody else and help them grow into that role instead of me doing that myself. But I decided to swim across the lake that year. From starting not being able to swim, I thought I could do that. I knew I would do it with fear because I don't like swimming out past the drop off. I like to swim where I can see the bottom, but I thought I can do that. So I set the Cross the Lake swim as my goal, and I swam the Cross the Lake swim that year and the next year, and I got my bronze medal my first year, and the second year I got a silver. And I have to say I did it with fear. I decided that I wasn't going to have my eyes open looking at the bottom of the lake as I crossed, in case I saw the Ogopogo and had to run across the top of the water. So I closed my eyes in the water and opened them when my head came out of the water. And so I did it with fear, but I did it. And doing things with fear has become part of a challenge in my life. Things like zip line that I did this last year at a ladies' retreat, things like the high ropes course at the first retreat I went to at Gardam Lake. Did it with fear, but I did it. And I've not only continued to challenge myself in that area, but other people in my life. Sometimes there's things that you may feel challenged to do, and maybe it's one of those things that you're going to do with fear, but you're going to do it, and you come out of it a different person from the one you were when you went in.